He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counsellors of peace have joy. No grave trouble will overtake the righteous, but the wicked shall be filled with evil. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we meditate in Proverbs chapter 12 on some of these verses which deal with speech in relation to righteousness and evil. Each of us has a tongue, and we speak. Speech is very important in our society. With our tongue we can speak words of comfort or words that hurt. We can speak the truth, or we can speak deceptive words which misrepresent the truth or are blatant lies. And that's the topic of these verses. Jesus' words concerning this, when confronted about eating with unwashed hands, said that it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of his mouth. What comes out of a man's mouth declares what is in his heart. James uses the picture of a spring. A spring yields maybe salty water or fresh water. You don't get both. It depends on the source of that water. And so a man's mouth speaks either righteousness or evil, depending on what is in his heart. It is out of the heart that the mouth speaks. And so the heart will either be righteous before God, seeking to bless, as Paul says, let no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but such as is good for edifying. And the Lord Jesus told us not to bring curses and speak evil words against a person. It's equivalent to murder. Well, what is Solomon saying? He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. So a false witness knows what the truth is, but wants to cover it up and declare that the truth is something other than what it is. He does that to deceive. There are many false witnesses around, because people will always seek to make a good impression. An example was given to me the other day. The amount of energy a light bulb uses is measured by its wattage, whether it is 40 watts or 60 watts or 100 watts or 5 watts. That's the amount of energy used. But there was a movement a decade ago which promoted downlights, and these were promoted as being low voltage lights. And so it was implied that these were good lights to have. Unfortunately, while they were low voltage, they were high wattage. So to give light in a room you needed a lot of downlights, and each one of them was 50 watts. So you were using much more power. But the deceitful witness came along. What he said was true, but it was with deceit. They were indeed low voltage 12-volt lamps, but they required high power. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. The scriptures give us many examples of deceitful dealing. I'm thinking of the story of Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab was king of Israel about 750 BC. He married Jezebel, a beautiful young lady, a princess from Sidon, just north of Israel. But Jezebel worshipped Baal, not the Lord. And so when she became queen, she brought with her many prophets of Baal and systematically set about destroying the prophets of the Lord. Her whole process was one of false witness, declaring that Baal was the all-powerful one, rather than Jehovah, the God of Israel. The day came when Ahab, looking out from his palace, thought, "I would like that piece of land as a vegetable garden. It's convenient to the palace, it's right beside. It would make a wonderful vegetable garden." So he went to see Naboth, the owner of the land, and said, "Dear Naboth, I'd like to buy your land. I'll give you a good price, and you can buy some more land somewhere else. But this land would be convenient and suitable for me. It'll make a great vegetable garden." Well, Naboth said, "Hey, no, I'm not going to sell this land. This is our family inheritance. We've been here for hundreds of years, and I must preserve it for my children. This is part of the heritage of the Lord." Naboth was a righteous person, and he had no desire whatsoever to sell his land. This made Ahab sulky. His great plans for his vegetable garden beside his palace were thwarted by his neighbour, who would not sell the land. And Jezebel noted him sulking about and said, "What's up with you?" "Naboth won't sell me his land so I can set up my vegetable garden." "Don't worry about it," Jezebel says. "We'll soon fix that. You're the king after all." So she wrote letters to the leading men of the city in the king's name, saying, "Call a feast and invite Naboth to a prominent position in the feast, and organise some men who will bear false witness against him. Tell him that they heard him swearing and cursing against God, and then you can have him stoned." The men of the city, knowing what Jezebel was doing, went along with her scheme. They called the feast. They invited Naboth to a prominent position. They orchestrated false testimony against him, and these false witnesses accused him of cursing God. And so, in shock horror, they had him stoned, and sent word to Jezebel, "The deed's been done." And Jezebel went to Ahab the king and said, "You can go and take that land now. You don't even have to pay for it. Naboth is dead." She was a false witness concerning God. She did not pursue righteousness and truth, and she promoted false testimony against Naboth to get advantage over him. The Lord held Ahab responsible for the death of Naboth, and Jezebel responsible for the death of Naboth, and in due course they were punished. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness bears deceit. It wasn't, of course, the only time that a person has been framed and condemned to death on the false testimony of others. In fact, it was the procedure that the chief priests attempted to use to have Jesus executed. They sought false testimony against him, but their rules of law needed two false witnesses to declare the same thing, and their false witnesses were not able to collude sufficiently to have the same false story, and so their attempts to get mud to stick to the Lord Jesus failed in their court, which is why that they ultimately accused Jesus of blasphemy when he confessed that he was the Son of God, he was the Christ. In many instances where a person speaks truth and righteousness, his enemies, unable to answer in truth, will resort to lies to get their way, to silence the testimony of the truth, which is why we need to be careful when we hear testimony about somebody, especially somebody in position of power and leadership. The New Testament urges us not to be gossips, not to pass on information, not to speak evil of people, and not to pass on that message, because it may not be the truth, which is why Paul says, "Let no unwholesome word depart from your mouth, but only those things which are good for edification." We are to bear testimony to the truth, speak the truth in love, and declare that which is righteous and good, but to be wary of the false witness that spreads deceit. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. It's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of his mouth.